So in today's video, I am going to be going over 4 games that I played recently a few weeks ago at my university's end of term Blitz tournament, where in each white game I tried to get the Catalan opening on the board, and on average I was playing against players who had online brains of about 18 to 1900. So I'd like to share these games with you guys today and walk you through my thought process, but without further ado, let's get right into it.
Okay.
So here we go, this is my first white game of the tournament where I'm playing against a good friend, actually Ian Stalker, and we open up with d4 c4, he goes for a King's Indian setup, and I opt for g3 bishop g2, playing in the fashion of the Catalan. So okay, we have the following moves, plays knight c6, and he goes for the setup with, on the queen side, going a6, I play b3, and he goes rook b8, aiming to play a quick b5, and I try my best to really make that more difficult for him by going for this very precise setup, which I'll explain a little bit after the game, hopefully, with d5, bishop to g5. And the Ian starts taking a little bit of a think. He plays h6, bishop back to d2, c5, and I take that very quickly, and now Ian has a little bit of a choice between going b takes c6, knight takes c6. Also, it might look a little bit weird what I did here with bishop to g5, like why not bishop b2, or also like why did I spend the whole move going to g5 rather, only to come back to d2 the next move. It actually turns out in some variations this pawn on h6 can be useful for white to have provoked. But okay, nonetheless, finally decides to take back the pawn, I blitz out c5, and the whole idea is that it's actually quite annoying if you really allow black to play c5 and then reorganize their pieces. So by putting our one pawn on c5, we make it much more difficult for black to basically reorganize all their pieces. And also, if they take, for example, win a pawn, then they have these double isolated c pawns we can target as weaknesses. And there is another option maybe they can have. They can push the pawn to d5, which Ian does. It's also worth noting if we take this, if they allow that, then these pawns can potentially be a little bit weak and can be used as weaknesses we can target. d5 is played, it looks very natural, but after bishop f4, which I play, and rook a8, I quickly play bishop to e5. As you can see, I have gained time on the clock, so this is all very familiar to me. I've had positions like these in the past, and basically the point is that black might have a bit of a space advantage, but it's very difficult for them to actually really use it because white controls the dark squares very well. So this attack c5, it wasn't really doing much knight over here, but as you can see, I quickly blitzed out b4, just protecting this, and unfortunately, yeah, the knight is not in a very good position right now. It doesn't really have any squares it can go to. So yeah, pretty much things are going almost as well as they could have so far. Again, we're going to discuss hopefully a little bit afterwards maybe how black, or like kind of what black really did wrong to end up in this position. But bishop to d7 is played. Not really the most active square for the bishop, but it is definitely difficult to suggest many good ideas for black at this point. Maybe one idea is knight d7 potentially to try and challenge control of the e5 square. And if they get an e5, it might not be so bad, but we can play, for example, e4 quickly before they manage to do so, because now with this pawn under pressure, either they release attention or they play e6, which of course, I mean, they can't have a pawn on e6 and e5 at the same time unless you break the physics of chess. So okay though, we have queen d4 coming up here, just simply increasing the pressure on this diagonal. Queen c8 comes very quickly, and yeah, during the game I didn't think I really understood this. Not that I thought I needed to, because I thought my position was so good, but yeah, knight a4, basically aiming for this, creating a fork. But as it turned out, the idea of queen c8, much as it sounds like I'm just trash talking Ian here, I think the idea actually was to, as I was talking about earlier, basically create a spot for this knight to escape to, because at the moment, yeah, it's not looking particularly bright. But if it comes to d8, maybe it can come to e6, and at least you can claim it's doing a little bit something there. But okay, rook a7 happens, avoiding the fork, and now we can maybe start thinking of remaneuvering the knight, but unfortunately, even if the knight really gets there, it's not really going to be doing a whole lot. And we need to be thinking basically on a fundamental level, like, okay, what is black's plan? And the issue is that black basically doesn't have a plan if you think about it. And this stems from the fact that we basically control the whole board and they don't have a like pawn break they can really play. And in chess in general, right, many of the plans we have are going to be directly tied to the pawn breaks available to us, and the only real pawn break, unfortunately, because of our control of the center that black has is maybe a5, but you know, we don't have to take it and spaz out, go frantic. We can just play a3, back the b4 pawn up, and it's not really clear how black continues from there. So my position looks really good, white's doing very well, but at this point I'm just thinking about how do I improve things further. And as you see here, I play knight to d2, and the idea is twofold, right? Well, one, okay, knight e6, this isn't really going anywhere. I just bring my queen back and keep the pressure on this diagonal, but also I'm now preparing something like e4 for the knight controlling the square, and I can also maybe think about bringing the knight over to a square like b3, where it then can go to potentially a5, and if that happens, well, this queen just might be trapped. So yeah, very difficult moment for black. And as you can see, Ian is definitely spending some time here trying to figure out, you know, what the hell is he really supposed to be doing. And yeah, after some thought, we see rook to d8, which, you know, doesn't really do much because, unfortunately, the file is kind of blocked, and it's, yeah, I think that doesn't really need much more explanation. But when you're in such a passive position, it's like, what else can you really do? Maybe one idea is that, okay, maybe you want to get the bishop out of the way and then start trying to trade off some pieces, but it's very difficult as I start increasing the pressure on e4. If you just make a bunch of exchanges, right, like it might temporarily seem like you're relieving some of the pressure, but the reality is that your pieces are still all tied up, and I'm just going to continue slowly ramping things up with rook d2, rook d1, maybe even like h4, h5, and there's just nothing you can do. It is complete misery for black. So this is the state of situation at the moment after e4. So okay, we see knight c7 finally from Ian making a move, and you know, basically the idea, at least from what I can gather, is that it consolidates a d5 pawn, which we have just attacked. But yeah, unfortunately, the again fundamental issue with black's position is that maybe you're surviving, but you're definitely not thriving, because knight c7 just continues. Well, if we think about earlier, like where this knight was, it came to was on b7 initially, went back to d8, to e6, where it was supposedly going to be more active, only to come back to c7, where it is again not really doing a whole lot. So I continue on, actually not really trying to pressure d5 anymore. Well, sort of I am, my rook is now open on the file, but I'm not taking or releasing the tension, anything. I am just increasing the pressure just in a slightly different area of the board, trying to bring my knight over to the a5 square from where it will attack the queen, and it's kind of difficult to stop that, because unless you play a5, like, and sacrifice the exchange, or maybe a pawn with queen a6, it doesn't really lead anywhere. But unfortunately, as we see here, the game just ended very quickly. Actually, bishop e6 was played, and after knight a5, queen a8, hanging the queen. Unfortunately, queen b8 isn't much better, because hangs that. We simply saw a resignation. So in a nutshell, what really went wrong, and it's very difficult to quite describe. I will say for one thing that at the Grandmaster level, this line with a6 and rook b8 is quite rare these days, although historically it has been very respectable because of this very particular plan with d5, knight a5 and bishop g5, where it isn't so easy for black to play b5. For example, if black plays b5 in this position, we go takes, b4, and now this pawn is quite weak, and we could consider moves like knight d4, but even more accurate is actually queen to b3, where knight takes b5, or also something like a4, and later knight d4 are also threats when it's very difficult for black to defend this, while also not hanging their knight on the c4 square. Also, I should mention after h6, bishop d2, b5, we don't even have to do this. Well, probably it doesn't work as well because our bishop's hanging now, but we can actually, in this situation, now play knight takes b5, and after a takes b5, simply win a pawn. So after bishop d2, c5 is the most principled move, and probably knight takes c6 is maybe a little bit more sound than b takes c6 because c5 is quite annoying to face. But even in these structures, white has a bit of a space advantage in the center, and one example of how this h6 move can be to black's disadvantage is that now after knight to d5, this knight gets quite active, and if black tries to take it, then after c takes d5, the knight really struggles finding a good square, and if knight e5 takes, they cannot easily recapture back with the bishop. They instead have to double their own pawns because the h6 pawn is ultimately hanging, which is a rather deep idea behind why bishop g5 provoking h6 is stronger than going bishop d2 immediately. Alright, so this is the second game of the tournament where I have white. I'm playing against Marcus here, who I believe says he has a chess.com rating of around 2000. So anyway, so the game opens up with d4, knight of 6, c4, e6, and I go for g3, again playing in the style of the Catalan, and after d5, knight of 3, and he takes on c4, which is the more direct open Catalan approach. c5, immediately contesting the center, knight c6, and I play knight e5. As you can see, this is actually a very well scoring move in the Lichess database, especially when they play one of these moves like knight takes d4 or knight takes e5. Marcus plays the correct move though, bishop d7, I blitz out knight to a3, and it looks a little bit strange what is going on so far. It's a bit complicated in the center, but things clarify after c takes d4, knight takes a4, all the best moves so far. When basically white has the centralized knights, our bishop is also very dangerous on this diagonal, and we basically just want to bring all our pieces to the center and play in a very harmonious fashion. And basically what we're saying is that because of our piece's activity, eventually this pawn is probably going to drop, or maybe the b7 one. Okay, so we say bishop e7 from Marcus, but yeah, the point is that with our piece's activity, our hope is eventually that something is going to come of that, and most likely we're going to win back the material with also more active pieces. This is definitely true in the majority of situations if you're like under 2000, let's say, and your opponents don't really know the theory. In this game, however, Marcus actually seemed to kind of know what he's doing. Queen c7, I bring my bishop into f4, and we see knight h5. This is a very important move. Otherwise, like, yeah, there's going to be all sorts of nasty discovered knight threats. So yeah, knight h5, and this is where I start going in the tank a little bit and really trying to calculate some stuff, because obviously my bishop's under attack, and maybe it's okay to allow the structure, but at the same time I am weakening my king a little bit. So something that I was definitely looking at was knight takes c6 when black is then forced to take my knight, and then I can, for example, take their bishop, they can take my bishop, and we have this very strange situation where both our knights are hanging at the same time. Yeah, it's difficult to quite know what to make of that sort of position, because also there's not necessarily a need to immediately take back either knights, because white's knight is trapped, it can't go anywhere, and so is black's knight. So that is definitely what I was spending most of my time thinking of here. Also, it's worth noting, of course, like I don't really have a choice to like move my bishop backwards. Definitely not, because then I would just simply hang my knights. So I'm forced at this point by black to really come up with something concrete. Otherwise, like, yeah, I'm probably just going to be like maybe worse. So okay, yeah, I finally decided to take on c6. Marcus plays knight takes f4, forced, knight takes e7, and yeah, a little bit of hesitation there, but knight takes g2. And this is where yeah, okay, so putting these moves on the board, decide that, okay, maybe I don't have to go king takes g2 immediately, because then, okay, they're gonna take back and like start bringing the pieces in. So I decided first of all to go rook to c1, and my whole idea is that, like, okay, if he takes, I go check, and then like my rook is now staring at the queen, and maybe I have some annoying knight discovery on the c file. So Marcus starts going in for a bit of a think here, so I'd just like to take this opportunity to briefly come back to this point and kind of highlight why this move scores so well. 95, because there's some other things you can do, like d takes c5 and invite a queen exchange, but this isn't necessarily to everyone's taste, and queen a4 is another popular line, but sometimes this can get very complicated where black starts like putting all this crap over here on the queen side. The idea is if you take, then like this is just kind of bad. So 95, it scores very well in the lead chess database, and one of the big reasons is if knight takes d4, right, e3, and well, black is just screwed here because knight takes, well, knight f5 rather, we just take, and then when they take back, knight takes f7 is a very nasty fork. If they come back this way, this is also just really, really bad. So that was why bishop d7 was forced, and here this position, you know, as white, you don't just want to like make some random exchange, because then that's going to help devolve black's pieces. So you instead keep the tension in the center, try to come here and take this pawn. Also, I should mention knight takes e5, something like knight a3 will play, try and take back this pawn, and if we get this, this is a very nice position. If they try to do this, then this is also going to be probably quite nice with a lot of compensation. Might have even been like queen c2 maybe, can't quite remember, but regardless, neither of those moves score very well, so that's why Marcus played this whole bishop d7 thing. And it's worth noting as well, a lot of people might be kind of scared to go queen c7 because it does kind of look like you're walking into this, so a lot of people might go rook b8, but unfortunately you need to kind of play things head on. Otherwise, like with this, bishop f4, and like this is really actually quite bad. So you know, most people aren't going to play it as accurately as Marcus will. Most people, to be honest, especially under 2000, won't even play like this d takes c4, c5 line. You kind of need to know a bit of theory to be able to play this way. And after we get to this position, right, even here, I mean, white still has some pressure. So even if black does know some theory, they still need to make sure, like at the end of things, that they're comfortable playing in the arising position. But okay, we see after rook c1, queen c5. And this was a bit of a surprise, but it makes sense because basically he wanted to avoid these checks. And truth be told, actually, it probably wasn't the end of the world if he did allow something like this. It's not like I'm going to checkmate the king of 96, bishop c6. And I think the computer says this is still like equal, which might not mean much, but like basically the idea is right, is that the knight's kind of trapped, but at the same time it's defended, and it's not so easy for white to win it back, and I can't easily checkmate the king. So it's basically just a complete clusterfuck of a position. But okay, yeah, we see queen c5, I takes back the knight, and here you need to be a little bit careful, right? Because if you just play king takes g2, there might be some like rook b8 crap, and then like if you go back here with the queen, bishop c6, and you're actually just losing the house. So yeah, after king takes e7, yeah, you want to be a little bit careful playing this one. Maybe you're still okay after queen to a6, but I would, you know, have some second questions about that, definitely. So I sort of doubting king takes g2, and maybe looking at queen takes g2, but thinking that's kind of passive, and I want my king over here. I was trying to come up with something else, and I end up deciding on this move, knight d2, an in-between move. attacking the queen, and I wasn't really concerned about something like queen to a5. I think I don't even remember what I had planned here. I think I might have been like rook c7 maybe, and I thought like this would maybe get quite active, but yeah, unfortunately I just forgot, as Marcus played here with queen b6, that now I don't really have time to just like play rook c7 and increase the pressure along the 7th rank, and like I don't really want to exchange queens either, because then like, okay, I might win the knight back, but I then lose that. So I instead decide to kind of bite the bullet here and just go queen takes g2. And yeah, I actually wasn't so worried about them taking on b2, because I thought like, okay, they can go grab all these pawns, but if they get too greedy, they win this pawn back, and then like they kind of have to worry about their king safety. So rook a to c8 is what we see, and yeah, now I feel like with queen takes b2, with the rook sort of more involved and covering like the c4 square, it is a little bit more risky just to leave this pawn hanging. So I was sort of thinking like, at this point, yeah, I want to sort that out. So I could just push b3, but as you'll soon see, I decided on something a little bit different and, well, quite frankly, a very natural move, as I'm hovering my hand over and for some reason second guessing myself. Knight c4 probably took way too long to play that move, but I think there was probably some element of ego involved, where like for some reason here I played knight d2 and immediately I could have just taken. Instead I was like a maniac and spent like 10 moves moving the knight back and forth, right? But still, I would say overall at this point I was feeling quite comfortable with my position, mainly because like their king is in the center, material is equal, and maybe I don't have my fianchettoed light squared bishop around my king, but I do have a fianchettoed queen. No, I'm kind of joking about that. Fianchettoed queen is probably not a good thing, especially when they have h5, h4 that they could potentially throw down your throat. And yeah, especially in this position, right? Like I can't just give a mindless check, then g5, and they're gonna like take the knight, right? So I decided that after this, well, logically I need to defend the knight. So once I do that though, I was going to re-embark on my childhood dreams of potentially getting at the black king, which I'm not sure how it's going to quite work, because while it is definitely in the center, it isn't necessarily like chronically weak. There are other guys surrounding it, right? So especially with f6 now, preparing e5, definitely doubts are starting to come into my mind. Bishop c6, I should mention, by the way, I wasn't too fussed about playing f3, to be honest. Like, okay, maybe it's not the most ideal move to make in the world, but you know, you do what you got to do it to protect the king, and then start trying to potentially, I'm not sure about e3, maybe like queen h4 and attack the pawn with like the rooks, maybe double up even, and yeah, sort of play in that fashion. But okay, after f6, some thinking, I decided to go queen to g4 and basically just attack the g7 pawn. And yeah, Marcus is kind of getting low on time here. I think less than 20 seconds. So plays king f7. I'm also kind of low on time, getting down to my last 30 seconds. Of course, we have a 3-second increment, so it's not too bad. But king f7, yeah, I sort of had alarm bells going off at this point that, like, I can maybe play e4, and if they just move their queen to the side, maybe I can play e5 and sort of shut down them ever going like this. And if they play that, well, this is going to be incredibly weak. So Marcus just took this, and at this point I start thinking, I wasn't really thinking, I was just sort of double checking. I didn't really want to take this back. My whole plan was to just like sack off a pawn, let them take with check, but basically say that when I get my rook onto the d file, I'm going to be invincible. So I go rook fd1, and now this looks very dangerous, because there's not only me like doing stuff along here with the rook, but also knight d6 potentially. Getting down to his last few seconds, Marcus quickly plays queen b5, but then just wanders the queen, realizes that, and resigns, unfortunately. But yeah, as I was showing him on the board right now, I thought he probably could have just, after going takes here, gone queen c5 check, and after queen d4 takes. I still insisted I thought this was good, but then yeah, as you see here, he could go king e7 and then not only stop this, but also protect the bishop, and this would actually be horrible, to be honest. So I think if queen c5 check did happen, I can probably play like the king maybe like to f1 or something, but it is a little bit dodgy, I'm not gonna lie. However, as it turned out, I was still winning. I just had to use the correct rook. for example, rook cd1, and now if takes, I can recapture with the rook very importantly. And if queen comes to c5, well, of course, there's not going to be any check, and this works out just perfect. So for this game, I am paired against Ted Power, I think 13, 14-year-old, and pretty decent with a FIDE rating of about 1800 FIDE. Don't ask me why he is playing in our university blitz tournament. We don't want the police coming over here or anything. But okay, in this game, I decided to go, instead of g3 immediately like I did in the last game, I go for a knight f3 move order, which can also work if they go d5, and then g3 is pretty standard. But okay, I allow Queen's Indian this time. And here we see these pretty standard moves. Bishop e7 is the main move, not really committing in the center, because after c5 is Ted plays, this does kind of allow d5. And okay, he takes this quickly. Looks like he might have studied this before. I play knight h4, and he plays g6, which I think is quite important. My idea, of course, was with knight h4, I'm pinning the pawn so that I can win it back. And if he just plays bishop e7, for example, this can get kind of annoying. So g6 makes sense. I play knight c3, adding pressure to the pawn. He develops quickly. And yeah, basically what we're getting out of this eventually is I'm probably going to take back the pawn. I think I was just considering like castling and waiting even longer. Probably not a big difference with taking immediately. I might have also been contemplating taking with a piece and trying to keep a piece on d5 instead of putting the pawn there. But yeah, generally speaking, when you allow that many piece trades, it's difficult to really expect much to come of it. At the end of that, if you imagine a queen on d5, right, they just play knight c6, they castle, and yeah, it's not really that amazing for me, to be honest. So c6, d5, plays d6, he's really blitzing everything out, as you can see. So castles, and yeah, looks like I'm planning e4 next. But yeah, in general, the position we have is very much like a Benoni structure where I've incated my kingside bishop. And generally speaking, right, these sort of positions I'm not a big fan of. And it's also why earlier on this move I played, instead of playing g3, I played knight f3 this game. But okay, just returning to the game, I'll briefly explain this more soon. 95 was played, and I actually thought this was very strange, especially his follow-up. I think if you take back the rook, it's reasonable. But d takes e5, it felt very strange to me because he basically just gave me a protected pass d pawn now for no clear compensation. And if you put your knight on d6 and blockade the pawn, I think that can be decent. But yeah, the queen is a blockader of the pawn, generally strategically not very good. He was playing quickly, but I felt like his position was strategically kind of suspicious. So I felt quite confident that, you know, if I just kept up with the right moves and found the right plan, which in my head I was already thinking of, like eventually doing some sort of knight remaneuver to like c4, because on c3 actually it's not doing that much if you really think about it, because like it's just butting its head against everything, and maybe it's preventing like b5, you could say, but ultimately it's not doing as much as it could do. Like if we could just teleport to c4, we would, of course. So the only real issue is like, okay, this maneuver, it's great if we can get it there. It's just a matter of like, is it like too time consuming, right? So Ted's moving around a lot. It's not very clear what he's trying to achieve at this point, at least during the game. It definitely wasn't to me. Again, I just want to briefly, probably not now because I moved right here, but yeah, knight b1, as I was saying, I kind of want to put the knight on the c4 square. Ted plays f5, which is probably what his idea was with knight d7 to clear the way for the pawn. But yeah, I still felt just like I'm really not sure what the hell Ted was doing, because like okay, basically here's the way I think of it, right? Like it sort of looks a little bit scary with them charging forward with their pawns, but like for example with f4, I just go knight c4, right? And then like it looks like my bishop might have been getting trapped for a second, but it's not really the case, and now I just have all the strategic advantages in the position, and black's counterplay is pretty much going nowhere because, like, they have maybe one piece really, along with the f5 pawn, that's really sort of spearheading the way on the king side. Everything else is just sort of like, standing around watching, right? So I was never really that concerned with this whole f5 thing, to be honest. I know a lot of players, right? They see like their opponents, like, moving stuff on the king side, especially like this f5 break. A lot of people have PTSD from the King's Indian with this sort of pawn break. But yeah, to be honest, I guess just from experience, I wasn't really that concerned seeing this because I just knew, like, okay, I outman him here, right? Like, well, maybe outwoman because my queen is here as well, right? But was not really a concern. And here I started thinking a little bit, because, okay, again, I improved my knight to c4. My pieces are looking pretty good, but how do I really, like, really crank the screws in and make Ted kind of regret what he's doing? I had my hand hovering over a5, and to be honest, it's probably a fine move, trying to break apart this structure, right? But at the end of the day, I ended up deciding on b4. And Ted takes this very quickly, which, I mean, I don't know if he even thought that through, to be honest, but he played it. And yeah, I'm on the crux of really breaking this apart. But of course, I need to be a little bit concerned now, given that he's taken this pawn. My d5 pawn is kind of hanging. So I was definitely contemplating here just a simple move d6. This is what I indeed end up playing. And Ted takes a little bit of a think here as he starts to realize maybe life is a bit more difficult than he realized, where you can give the exchange up, but it's probably not so great when I'm just like, maybe I have like I'm pawn down for the exchange, but like these pawns are also weak, and that's sort of where black's extra pawn is, right? So I just want to briefly return to the opening phase. So I was talking about this earlier. Why did I play knight f3 instead of g3? I think g3, if you're a bit lower rated, is a slightly maybe easier move order. But a lot of these fianchetto Benoni positions I'm kind of not a big fan of, which is ironic because that's actually sort of what we end up gaining in the game. But the drawback for them is their bishop on b7. Well, their bishop is committed to b7, where it's not such a great piece. But anyways, returning to the game because some action's happening. d6, queen d7 was played, attacking this but letting this hang. So I end up taking this. Which does give this pawn up, but I end up winning a pawn back in the process. Material was equal. However, if we take stock here, who is better? And well, I would say it is clearly white, just because we have a like massive positional advantage. This whole like king side thing went nowhere, to be honest. And I have a majority on the king side. My pieces are better. Sorry, queen side rather. My pieces are just better, and yeah, it's not really clear, to be honest, what black is doing. King f7, I didn't understand, and I don't think I ever will understand. But yeah, knight c4, just regrouping my pieces. And yeah, I just want to bring my knight to d6, give a bit of a cheeky check there. And yeah, the only thing really standing in my way here is the fact that Ted has like a goddamn 3-minute time advantage on the clock, right? It's pretty absurd. But luckily for the 3-second increment, I'm probably not going to flag unless something ridiculous happens. But we saw bishop f8, I exchange it, don't need to overthink that too much. Takes back, and yeah, I think at this point I was starting to think about like maybe infiltrating with my queen or something, but then I realized like, oh, if I do that right, then he takes, and he just wins a piece. So I instead brought my knight back to e3, just sort of bringing it to a very safe, secure square, where it's blockading this pawn, and it's just overall like well placed in the square, very well centralized, and I can consider something like rook c7 next as well. That's a bit of a cheeky threat there. So yeah, not an easy position for black, and Ted plays knight to d5, and yeah, the issue of this is okay, it stops rook c7 maybe, but what it doesn't stop is the fact that now this pawn is loose because the knight's no longer defending that. I decided to take on e4 without taking this, but it turns out maybe there was some cheeky knight f4 ideas. But okay, ends up taking it, and this was music to my ears because generally speaking, you know, when you're up this much material, well, I'm not up that much, but I am up a pawn, and also in addition to that, like this is clear positional advantage of the queenside pawn majority where I can create a passed pawn pretty easily, and also sort of a weak king. I have a better pawn structure. It all kind of adds up to really a lot, so I was very happy to get this, and it's a sort of position where even if you're low on time, it's not that difficult to convert. Ignore the kind of useless check I gave there. For a second, I was dreaming of like infiltrating with my queen around here or some fancy stuff like that, but then I realized I might be allowing counterplay, so I thought I should just blockade the pawn. Okay, king g7, rook c1, and he plays queen f5, offering an exchange. I thought this should be a pretty trivially winning rook endgame, but it turns out I actually kind of scuffed this one up where yeah, he plays rook b7 and I exchange, which was not good because generally speaking, in many endgames, rook endgames especially, trading pawns is only going to help make the position more drawish. I thought this was an exception where I thought this pawn would be very like kind of difficult to stop, but given that it is a flank pawn, that isn't necessarily true. But okay, we saw some stuff where he started playing like f4. By the way, if this was like a b pawn, this would be pretty trivially winning, I think. But he took, went e4, and he's exchanging stuff off. So from a sort of conceptual point of view, that is good. The only issue though is that my king is about to go to e3, and if he doesn't stop that, things could be getting a little bit ugly. So I think if you go rook a3, you can hold the position still, but instead, Ted, plays king f7, and then I just played king e3, rook a2. So he's trying to make so if I take this, this is going to drop. But yeah, unfortunately now with my king on e3, not being cut off by a rook or anything, this is incredibly difficult to hold, and to be honest, it's just not going to work out. So a6, and yeah, he tries to bring the king closer. But yeah, unfortunately, as you can see here, I can simply queen. And after all the exchanges, the pawn endgame is a pretty trivial win, so there was some sloppy king moves, ignore that. I thought they even made an illegal move here, but it turns out, looking back, it was all legal, at least from what I can observe. But again, for this game, I would really say a big turning point was this position, right, where the piece is full of boards, very complicated, but then all of a sudden, knight e5 was just, especially followed by d takes e5, a big positional mistake, after which I really had very nice control of the game, and barring like the small endgame mistake I made, right, with just trying to exchange the pawns too quickly, I'd say it was a pretty clean game overall. So for the final game of today where I had white, I was playing against Hugo. I'm not sure quite what his rating is. I imagine his online would be somewhere around 18 to 1900. But okay, in this game, I thought he was going to play e6 for a second and then we'd get some sort of catalan probably. But he doesn't even allow that. He goes for the Budapest. I take it, of course, knight g4. And we have the following moves, which are pretty standard theory. There are, of course, some other moves that both sides could play, but we instead went for this stuff. Of course, I am not going to like be a lunatic and blunder this mate trap, but okay, I go to e3, I take it, bishop e2, very standard stuff here, and after castle d6, we see this kind of interesting moment where I decided to play knight b3. I could of course play a3 and invite this exchange, but knight b3 is always a tad awkward for black because the bishop is sort of gonna get trapped here. And when I say trapped, I mean it can come to c5, but then I take double their c pawns, and I also get the bishop pair. So positionally, that isn't the best for them, and is why usually in this position, I think it's considered best for black to take and then go d6. But yeah, d6 was played here, knight b3, and Hugo goes in the tank, and I'm trying to remember what the hell was my like plan, because like in a lot of these positions, even if this does happen, it isn't that simple. They can get the open b file, maybe they get the bishop here, they can like do some weird crap on the king side. Hugo eventually decides to go rook e8, play a3. That was like the whole idea, and basically only move bishop c5 shouldn't be too hard. He plays it, and no thinking, take, and yeah, opening is kind of over at this point, and I need to decide like what the hell am I doing. Okay, maybe I have a slightly better pawn structure, I have the bishop here, but what do I actually do with it? And if you're a computer, you will just stick your queen in black's face actually and play queen to d5. And this is actually quite annoying because basically the point is, as we saw in the game, Hugo ended up getting b6, bishop b7, ended up getting the bishop on a pretty annoying diagonal, but queen d5 kind of stops that and says that, like, okay, you can play c6 and kick the queen away, but then we've kind of stopped you from doing this stuff, right? And if you play bishop e6, then you hang the pawn. So it's a little bit difficult for black to play this for that reason. I end up going queen c2 though, which is a fine move and all, but it doesn't allow black to get this very harmonious up on the queen side, which I maybe could have stopped. So ends up playing b6, and I need to think a little bit about here. What do I do? I have a pretty clear option. I thought though I want to bring a rook to the d file. It's just a matter of which rook, and to be honest, I felt like after I played my next move that I picked the wrong one. We're going to see what I mean in short order.
I don't want to push it. Just hand it.
So yeah, finally I decided to play rook 8 d1. Not sure why I actually spent that much time, to be honest, but okay, very quickly bishop b7 follows. I decided to try to double my rooks up. But yeah, what my regret sort of was here was I felt that after knight g6 from black, trying to attack my bishop, which I'd probably move, after knight h4, I thought this would be very annoying to face because he's attacking my g2 pawn. There's no easy way to defend it. If I go f3, I lose e3. And if I take it, then I lose my advantage of the bishop here. And like, he still sort of has like this dangerous looking attack. So I wasn't a big fan of that. Apparently the engine just wants to play rook fd1 and sack off g2 and like get rook d7 in. Fair enough, I didn't quite see that from afar. It also suggests like rook d5 in this position, which like sacks the exchange, and I guess sort of says we have the bishop here and your knight's weird there. Not sure I would quite come up with that in the game, but okay, yeah, he started thinking a little bit here and decided how is he going to deal with me doubling the rooks up. I was kind of annoyed by this, and by the way, why was rook fd1 better in this regards? Well, if you think about it right now, if we go for this whole knight g6 thing, I thought I'd get bishop f1, and because the rook isn't occupying that square, we can conveniently defend e4. But okay, had a bit of a sigh of relief here. He played rook a8. Can't speak, my god. Rook takes d2, queen takes d2. Surprise of the exchange. It's probably fine, but I just sort of felt that he allows me to gain control of the d file, and I didn't really see particular need for that. But yeah, black is still very, very solid actually, and it's very difficult for white to really come up with a concrete plan. Like I was thinking b4, but like I was thinking, you know, if he just takes or does something like that, it it's kind of like, or even if he just doesn't, he just keeps the tension. Like, where's my pawn going from here? Am I going to take that? Probably not, right? Because then he just like really hammers on all my weaknesses. So it's a real point of just, real contemplation, thinking about like, where am I actually going with things? I play h3, just sort of mimicking him, just creating a bit of a love for my king potentially. And to be honest, I didn't have like a particularly amazing plan lined up. I'm just sort of in the mindset of like, okay, I have the bishop here. I just need to slowly increase my advantage, and eventually, if God doesn't completely hate me, I'm probably going to be able to make something of it. But okay, queen e6 obviously attacks this. And I was confronted with a few different options. I was thinking queen c3 maybe, also b3, probably not rook c1, feels a bit kind of weird to do that. But yeah, I ended up going b3, just protecting the pawn like so. Didn't really see any drawbacks to doing so. There is maybe the one, which is that like, okay, if I want to go for b4, then queen c3 would probably make a bit more sense, so I don't have to rely on the pawn sticking back to really hold everything together. But okay, see this, queen g6, bishop g3, of course defending against the mate threat. By the way, I shouldn't play bishop f1 here because knight to f3 would just simply win the queen. So bishop g3 felt about right. I think, considering for him, if he goes h5, this might be slightly annoying, but I thought like if I go h4, I can sort of hold it together. So yeah, this was a point where I had to think about like, what was I going to, or actually no, what was he going to do? And he went queen c6, which I wasn't super impressed with, because I felt like I could defend that pretty simply with my next move. Well, actually no, I was thinking a little bit here, because at first I want to go bishop to f1 and not make any pawn moves, and I realized like this might actually kind of be really annoying. Like, I don't see how to like stop this, to be honest. So I was like, oh, might want to avoid that, right? And so I played pawn to f3, he brings his queen back. I just played king h2. I think I might have missed in this position, like the opportunity to take and go queen d8. I ended up going for something like that very soon though, actually, because he gave me another chance. But definitely a bit of a miss on my part, and I think he probably could have gone something, well, I don't know what he could have done here, but he probably could have done something to just stop that. Maybe let's think for a second and use our brain for once. Maybe it's difficult. Maybe like queen f6 and just like make sure you can retake back for the queen. Not too sure, but yeah, obviously you can see things are going well though. Bishop pair made some improving moves. Time advantage on the clock, and now he plays h5. This is what I was talking about. He gives me a second chance at going for the bishop e5 thing, followed by queen d8. But the issue is, guys, is that after this queen d8 and like king h7, right, if I just take that, I am technically forking this and this, but after takes on b7, rook takes e2, like material is equal, and he's also attacking me at the same time. So I wasn't completely convinced by that, but I really was still bought into the idea that somehow maybe I could make that work. So I was calculating the way here, and like worst case scenario, I was thinking like, okay, I just put like e4, right, and increase my space advantage, throw the blunt the bishop, and like I have the bishop here, so I must somehow be winning. It's sort of my thought process, at least. So yeah, calculating the way though, and I eventually decided to take. And my idea was that after rook takes e5, check, king h7, which is his only move here, I, in short order, maybe not as short order as I thought, played this move bishop to d3. And the whole point was that I basically force f5. You don't have any other good ways to deal with this skewer here. And, or maybe, I don't know, you'd call it a pin. But yeah, f5 is forced, and now queen takes c7. And the whole point here is that now we got bishop d3 in time, such that, like, if you take this, our bishop is protected, so we can simply take this, and we're a piece up. And yeah, as you can see, a bit of a tough moment for black. I think at this point realized, like, yeah, I'm just winning.
Yeah, but like that first one, so I don't really matter.
I was always sacrifice. Actually,
Yeah, triple.
actually, sacrifice. Okay, so you have
Oh, yeah, sure.
But yeah, after some thought, Hugo pulls out his trump card. Bishop takes f3. But unfortunately, after takes, this might look scary for a few seconds, but after I'm speeding ahead a little bit, he ends up taking only now. And yeah, unfortunately though, after queen at f4, this all just falls apart. I'm attacking this and threatening this. Yeah, shaking his head there, realizes what has happened, and I think he plays one more move. Looks like, yeah, he plays rook e5, but realizes just hangs rook, so resigns there, and that was the game. But yeah, anyways, that just about wraps up the video, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. If you want more content on the Catalan, check out my video 20 ideas every Catalan player must know, the best opening to reach 2020-24, and others you can probably scroll from my channel. Also, if you are not subscribed, please do so, and also like, helps the video of course go off in the algorithm. And also, if you want one-on-one help with your game, I have a link in the description below for private coaching, so click that if you want further help. But with that being said, hope you guys have a good day.